When it comes to finishing a three-dimensional sculptural serpentine piece, something that's a little more curvilinear and voluptuous, we have to take a slightly different approach than we've been using on flat panels. And it's worth noting that animals and magicians have tricks. Woodworkers have tools and techniques. And we're going to be talking about some different tools and techniques to get this guy ready to go out the door. And with the other surfaces we've talked about, historically one of the last things that they would have done before applying a resin would be to burnish the surface. They might have taken a handful of shavings, or they might have used a burnishing stick such as we've been using on some of the other surfaces, and simply rub the surface like this. And this is almost burnishing in the metallographic sense, that you are compressing and polishing the surface. You can use a boxwood stick. A ox horn is what I have here, is also a wonderful tool for compacting the fibers on the surface and bringing out the sheen even before anything is applied. And one of the beauties about a stick like this, and they come in many different shapes, you can just get them at art stores. They're sold as sculpting tools for clay sculpting, but these boxwood tools are really great because they can fit right in all the little interstices and spaces inside the carving. They can really buff things up in a hurry. By buff, I mean they can make them a little shinier and ready for finishing. But the old guys are really quite specific about using tools like this to finish off carving and sculpture, and definitely not using sandpaper, because sandpaper softens the surface, and you want to keep the crispness of all the tool marks that you've left behind. You don't want to spend time carving and then eradicating all the evidence of carving. Maybe that wasn't such a big deal in the past because nobody would have assumed anything different than it was carved. But in this day and age, when we have 100 different ways of doing something that's three-dimensional, if you're at all interested in carving and proud of it and want to preserve it, well, you really want to make sure that you keep the tool marks evident so that people don't think that you produced it on a CNC machine, unless you produced it on a CNC machine, in which case you might want to be proud about that. But we're talking about preserving the tools, the tool marks of the ones that are held in your hand, presumably with some level of skill that you want to accentuate. Now, what this does not get rid of all of the tool marks, and if you look, say, at an area here, or some of these surfaces on the ball, you can see what are called facets, and those are the evidence of handwork, and you want to preserve them. Now, after we've done the burnishing and preparing of the surface, we're going to go ahead and varnish it with some of the shellac varnish that we've already got mixed up. And again, this is where the tool choice is quite important. On our flat work, we're using flat brushes. But on a surface like this, a flat brush is going to want to squeegee itself off where you don't want to go, and it's going to have trouble getting down into all these places where you have undercuts and relief. So that's why we want to switch to a rounded filbert mop. They come in different sizes. I have a couple of different sizes here. I have a 3/4 inch and a 1 inch. They go all the way down to, I think, 1/4 inch. But for virtually all of the work I do, these two are fine. And I like them because they can get into the voids and they can actually follow the surface fairly well. Just by itself, they drape that surface and deposit the varnish right where you want it to go with minimal risk of runs. Obviously, if you just pour the whole container on there, you're going to have a little bit of a problem, but we'll just start here at the top and work our way down. And you can see how the brush really drapes around the workpiece, which is really quite a nice feature. And in the old days, they probably would have used an oval sash maker's brush for this sort of process. But we don't have to put a lot of finish on here. It just is going to look really quite spectacular by the time we get it done. Keep an eye out for any runs or drips, or since this is baseball season, errors, I guess. You don't want any runs, drips, or errors. And just keep applying it gently. Don't slather it. Don't whip it up into a frenzy. You're just laying the varnish on the surface, making sure that you get it everywhere, but not anywhere too much. And we'll move ourselves down to the bottom in just a minute to get the ball and claw dealt with in its own time and in its own way. So we've got the ball and claw, and I'm just going to place this on top of the bench stop here so it can be up off the bench a little bit, and maybe you can see it a little bit better. But you want to use your brush fairly dry. You don't want stuff just, dripping off. But if you see, I can get right in there with this brush, and I hope you can see it. And in the rest of the time, it's really draping around the curvilinear, more voluptuous surface and depositing a nearly flawless film of varnish right where it needs to be. And you don't have to worry about it. Like everything else, it takes a little practice to get a feel for it. And because of the way we're working here, most of this is occurring out of my ability to see what's happening. So I'm hoping what's happening is what I'm describing. You just can't really tell from where I'm working, but I'll depend on the good graces of practice to make sure that this is doing what I want it to do. Okay, we're going to return to our leg here and buff it out, see what we can do with it. It's still a little green, but we're going to give it a try, see what we can accomplish with it. And you can rub it with steel wool to buff it down a little bit, but I tend to, with rubbed shellac finishes, I tend to charge my steel wool with wax. I literally dip it into the wax and then rub it like that. And what that does, and I rub it usually until it gets warm to the touch. That means that the surface is really becoming plastic, and I'm really infusing the wax down into the surface of the film, which is generally pretty desirable. And I'm only going to do the front half of this leg just for the purpose of expediency, but you would do it all the way around with wax and steel wool. I generally do keep a separate can for using steel wool and then one for using wax otherwise, because I don't always want to have the steel wool or bronze wool, if you will, or something else. I don't want those particles in the wax all the time. So I usually have several different cans of wax in the works at any one time. And again, there are so many really high quality commercially available waxes. Just make sure to pick out a wax that doesn't contain any silicones and preferably doesn't contain any toluene or any other noxious solvents. Not that I'm overly concerned about your health and safety, but I tend to be somewhat concerned about toluene and its effect on existing coating films that you're working on top of. Now, one of the things that maybe does approach a trick, I don't know, is to approach these areas down here where you have these little crevices in the carving, And in that particular case, I'll really slather on some wax, quite heavy. Is it heavy or heavily? I don't know. And then I'm going to sprinkle on some rotten stone, also known as Tripoli in the old days. And I don't really need the polishing capacity of the Tripoli here. It's not wanting to come out of my salt shaker very well. But if I work this into the surface just like that, with the rotten stone in it, if you're wonderfully observant, you probably notice that rotten stone has the color value of dirt. It's just a highly specialized dirt. So I'm going to flip the leg so I can do the other front area. Again, charge my pad with some wax and really slather it on here, and then put on the condiment. And just rub that in. And what that does is it allows you to almost mimic age, because one of the things that happens with age is stuff gets impregnated with dirt. And so you're, in a matter of seconds, impregnating the surface with the atomic compound of dirt. One of my favorite cartoons ever was two cavemen discussing the atomic chart for dirt. So we'll just set that aside and let the wax dry for just a minute, and then we can wipe it off and buff it up, and it'll be, to my aesthetic, my mind and my eye, really quite a wonderful surface. Let me just grab my mopping rag here. There we go. And then as you work, you can stand back from it for a minute to allow some of the solvent from the wax solution to just escape and let the surface all firm up even more, and then just buff it to done, and come back again after a few hours just to buff it one last time and bring that stuff up to a quite pleasant luster, and there you have it. Good to go. It's a little dull now, but once the wax really firms up and we can buff it high, it'll have really a very, very pleasing luster.